Before we dive into today's story, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss the twists and turns ahead. And if you love powerful, unexpected stories, share this video with someone who does too. It helps the channel more than you know. Now buckle up, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about family, fortune, and fate. Catherine Lowry had learned long ago that mornings rarely offered mercy, and this one proved no different. The Florida sun had only just begun to seep through the blinds of her cramped apartment when she discovered the water was off again. The notice taped to the front door yesterday hadn't been an empty threat. She stood in the bathroom doorway, staring at the dry faucet as though sheer willpower might convince the pipes to surrender a last drop. Behind her, 7-year-old Toby rummaged through his school backpack with the chaotic energy of a child who didn't yet understand the cost of late fees, overdue bills, or the quiet panic of being responsible for everything. She wished she could borrow that innocence for a moment. Instead, she told him gently to use bottled water and tried not to wince when she realized there were only 2 bottles left. She'd planned to save them for dinner. The morning unfolded like a familiar script, everything happening just a bit faster than she could manage. Toby spilled cereal across the countertop, the landlord banged on the wall to remind her rent was due, and her phone buzzed with a message from her manager asking if she could take an extra shift that evening. A part of her wanted to throw the phone against the wall and let it shatter just so something in her life would break loudly instead of silently. But she took a steadying breath and typed back that, yes, she could come in. She always could. People like her didn't really have the option to say no. It was while she was digging through a stack of unopened envelopes on the kitchen table, mostly bills, all of them demanding more than she had, that she saw the thick white envelope with a crisp black return address. The words Harrell and Briggs, attorneys at law, caused her to pause. For a moment she assumed it must be another debt collector hiding behind a more dignified letterhead. Still, something made her slide a thumb under the seal. Inside, a single typed page fluttered out, and as she read the first line, her breath snagged in her throat. She had inherited property in Louisiana, property left to her by her late uncle Henry Lowry, a man she hadn't seen since she was 12 and barely remembered. The letter stated the property was a house, an old family home, in a remote parish outside Baton Rouge, and that she was its sole heir. She had 30 days to claim it in person before it would be transferred to state ownership. She read the letter twice, then again, each time hoping she'd misread something. Her family didn't leave her things. They barely acknowledged her existence. She'd been the black sheep for as long as she could remember, the daughter of a teenage mother, raised on a patchwork of borrowed couches and hand-me-down sympathy. Her extended family, those who still carried the Lowry name, kept their distance, choosing to treat her as a kind of long-forgotten footnote in their otherwise respectable lineage. None of them had lifted a hand to help her when her mother died, nor when Toby was born, nor during the countless times she'd struggled to keep the electricity on. Why would Uncle Henry, a man whispered about more than spoken to, leave her anything? The more she thought about it, the more uneasy she became. It could be a mistake, she told herself, some kind of clerical mix-up. Yet the letter included her full name, her address, and instructions for contacting the firm. She folded it neatly, tucking it between the pages of her worn planner, and drove Toby to school with her mind tumbling in circles. Normally, he chattered endlessly from the back seat, narrating every passing dog, bus, and cloud. Today she barely heard him. Her thoughts kept drifting back to that letter, to the weight of the unknown pressing itself into her already overcrowded life. After dropping him off, she debated calling the attorney immediately, but some stubborn part of her wanted answers from her family first, and unfortunately there was only one person who might know something: her cousin Melissa. They hadn't talked in years, but Melissa had always been the gossip collector in the Lowry clan, the gatekeeper of every rumor and half-truth. If anyone knew why a man like Henry would leave a house to someone like Catherine, it would be Melissa. She dialed, bracing herself for the sharp-edged sweetness she remembered too well. Melissa answered on the second ring, surprised but amused. When Catherine explained the contents of the letter, Melissa let out a bark of laughter so shrill it distorted the line. She said the Lowry swamp house had been rotting for decades, that it had been a running joke whenever the family talked about its most embarrassing heirlooms. According to her, The place was unlivable, sinking into wetlands, infested with mold, possibly condemned. She said Uncle Henry had probably left it to her because no one else wanted the liability. Then came the insinuations Catherine had expected, but still felt like a slap. That someone like her should be grateful for any scraps thrown her way, that she had always been the charity case of the family, and that maybe this was their final way of reminding her of her place. Catherine ended the call quietly before the bitterness could spill over into anger. Melissa had always known how to hit where it hurt, but something softened unexpectedly inside her, a flicker of defiance she hadn't felt in years. If they thought this was a punishment, a joke at her expense, then maybe she owed it to herself to see this so-called ruin with her own eyes. After all, what did she have to lose? She had no house of her own, no real stability. Even a broken-down shack in Louisiana might hold more potential than the life she was barely holding together here. Over the next few days, she rearranged shifts, borrowed an old cooler from her neighbor, packed snacks for the trip, and told Toby they were going on a small adventure. He loved the idea immediately, bouncing with excitement at the thought of seeing a mysterious old house. She didn't have the heart to tell him it might be a pile of rubble. When they finally set out before dawn, the car's engine sputtered in protest, and she muttered a silent prayer that it would survive the drive. Toby slept for the first hour, his head against the window, his small hand still clutching the corner of a blanket he claimed he was too old for, but refused to leave behind. As they crossed the state line into Louisiana, the scenery shifted dramatically. The sky opened up into a wide, stretching canvas of pale blues, and the land became a patchwork of swamp, cypress groves, and winding waterways. Catherine cracked her window, letting the humid air curl through the car. Despite her nerves, she felt a strange pull, as though some part of her recognized the land in a way she couldn't explain. They passed through small towns where people rocked on porches and nodded politely as she drove by. And for a fleeting moment, she imagined what it might be like to live somewhere quiet enough to hear your own thoughts. Her GPS began failing as they approached the coordinates from the attorney. Cell service flickered, then vanished completely. The last stretch of the directions instructed her to rely on written notes. Turn at the old fishing shack. Follow the dirt road until the wooden bridge appeared. Toby pressed his face to the window, pointing out birds and glimpses of water through the trees. Catherine's hands tightened on the steering wheel as they rolled deeper into the forest, the dirt road narrowing until it felt more like a forgotten path. Then, just as she began to worry they had taken a wrong turn, the trees parted enough for her to see the wooden bridge stretching across a still expanse of water. It looked almost exactly like something from an old storybook, weathered, sturdy, and leading toward a house half hidden by trees on the opposite bank. She parked at the start of the bridge and stepped out, the air thick with the scent of moss, fresh water, and the faint sweetness of blooming wildflowers. Standing there, gazing at the structure ahead, she felt something shift inside her. The house wasn't a ruin, at least not from the outside. It was old, yes, and its dark wood was marked by time, but it stood tall, its peaked roof rising proudly above the treetops. Vines clung to the porch railings and the windows were dark, but the building held a dignity she hadn't expected. Toby grabbed her hand and tugged. He said it looked like a place where secrets lived. She smiled at his imagination, even though his words stirred an uneasiness she couldn't quite name. As they crossed the bridge together, the boards creaking softly beneath their feet, she tried to prepare herself for disappointment. But the closer she came to the house, the more she sensed that Melissa had been wrong. This place wasn't collapsing. It was waiting. They stepped up onto the porch, and Catherine felt the weight of history settle over her. The door was unlocked, swinging inward with a long groan, as though exhaling after decades of silence. Dust swirled in the narrow rays of sunlight penetrating the gloom. For a moment she hesitated, a prickle dancing between her shoulder blades. But Toby pushed past her excitedly, announcing he would explore the upstairs. She called after him to be careful, her voice echoing through the hollow space like a stranger's. Inside, the house felt preserved rather than abandoned. Furniture sat beneath pale sheets, walls held old photographs in ornate frames, and the floorboards, though creaking, felt sturdy underfoot. Catherine moved from room to room slowly, her fingers brushing surfaces, her mind trying to interpret the mix of nostalgia and eeriness that clung to the air. Whoever had lived here last had left in a hurry or with the expectation of return. Personal items remained untouched, as though the house had been frozen in time. It was only when she entered the kitchen that she noticed something peculiar, a strip of wall that didn't match the rest. The paint was thicker there, layered unevenly, and the edges looked slightly raised. It reminded her of something hastily concealed. She pressed her palm against it and felt a hollow echo beneath her hand. Behind that patched wall was a door someone had intentionally hidden. Her breath caught. The house, the inheritance, the secrecy. It was all beginning to feel less accidental and more deliberate. This trip, which she had thought would end with a quick inspection and perhaps a decision to sell whatever land was salvageable, suddenly stretched forward into uncertainty. The house seemed alive somehow, holding its breath as she examined the concealed space. She didn't open it then. Instead, she stepped back, listening to the distant sound of Toby exploring upstairs, the creak of steps, the faint rustling of old curtains caught in a breeze she couldn't feel. A sense of purpose, a fragile, hesitant spark began to glow within her. This house was more than an unwanted burden. It might become something else entirely. But for that to be true, she would have to face whatever secrets it held. The thought unsettled her, yet at the same time, it anchored her in a way she couldn't explain. For the first time in a long while, she felt something beyond worry or exhaustion. She felt curiosity, and beneath that, a faint pulse of hope, stirring like a long dormant seed waking in warm soil. She didn't know it yet, but stepping into that house marked the beginning of a change that would reach far beyond herself. She sensed only that this place, with its shadowed corners and silent memories, was the gateway to something she had never dared imagine. And as she called Toby downstairs and led him back to the car to return to Florida for the night, she couldn't help glancing over her shoulder at the house. It stood quietly against the water, watching, waiting, almost expectant. She had no way of knowing how much her life was about to transform, or how deeply this forgotten inheritance would carve its way into her future. But she would soon discover that the house had been left to her, not as a joke, nor as a burden, but as a test. And the door hidden behind that patch of mismatched paint would become the first step toward everything that followed. When Catherine returned to Florida that evening, the image of the house stayed with her, as vividly as if she were still standing on its porch. Even as she tucked Toby into bed and listened to him describe the adventure in excited fragments between yawns, the memory of the concealed door in the kitchen gnawed at her thoughts. She felt both drawn and unsettled, as if she had stumbled across the edge of a story that had waited too long for someone willing to follow it. It was nearly midnight by the time she sat alone at the small dining table. The letter from Harrell and Briggs spread out before her once again. She traced her finger over the embossed stamp at the bottom and tried to imagine Uncle Henry thinking of her while drafting his will. The notion felt improbable, yet the alternative, that a relative who barely knew her had left her a house for reasons unknown, felt even stranger. The more she contemplated it, the more urgent her curiosity became. Over the next 2 days, that curiosity grew into a kind of quiet determination. She rearranged her work schedule, made sure Toby would stay with her neighbor Mrs. Diaz, and prepared to return to Louisiana alone. This time she brought a basic toolkit, a flashlight, a set of gloves, and a small handheld camera she hadn't used in years. She tried not to dwell on what she might find behind the concealed door, reminding herself she wasn't the type of person who let fear dictate her actions. Life had already taught her too much about survival to let a patch of strange walling intimidate her. The morning she left again, the Florida sky was bruised with early clouds and the air hung heavy with the promise of rain. During the drive, she kept replaying her first impression of the house, its strange stillness, its stubborn endurance, the way it seemed to occupy its own private world on the water. She felt a tension in her chest as she neared the long dirt road, as if the house itself were waiting for her return. When she reached the wooden bridge, she paused, pulling the car to the side once more. The surface of the water was so still it reflected the trees perfectly, turning the world upside down for a moment. The house felt exactly as she had left it, watchful, reserved, expectant. Stepping onto the porch a second time felt different. The first visit had been cautious, hesitant, clouded by uncertainty. Now she approached with intent. The door opened just as easily, and the air inside greeted her with its blend of dust and time. She made her way through the downstairs rooms, noting details she had missed before. The quality of the woodwork, the expensive yet outdated furniture, the subtle care taken in preserving certain belongings. Whoever maintained the house before its abandonment had not intended to let it rot. Something had interrupted the rhythm of living here, leaving the house suspended in a moment that had stretched on for years. The kitchen greeted her with a quiet that felt almost too deliberate. She approached the mismatched strip of wall with a calmness she didn't feel, tracing the lines where the paint thickened and the boards beneath seemed less secure. As she had suspected, the layers came away with determined pressure. Some had been applied haphazardly, others with precise strokes, as if different hands at different times had tried to seal the space without leaving evidence of their efforts. It took her several minutes of pulling, prying, and scraping before the outline of a narrow wooden door finally revealed itself. Behind the door stretched a dark passage that angled downward. A faint dampness touched her face as she peered in with the flashlight. The staircase descending into the unknown was steep, narrow, and utterly silent. She felt her pulse quicken. It wasn't fear, not entirely but anticipation, the sense of approaching a secret that had been deliberately hidden from the world. She adjusted her grip on the flashlight, steadying her breath, and began to descend. At the bottom, the air shifted. It was cooler and cleaner than she expected, as if the room had been protected from the elements. The beam of her flashlight revealed stone walls fitted with remarkable precision, so unlike the wooden skeleton of the house above, that for a moment she wondered whether these foundations had been laid long before the structure above them. The floor was concrete, smooth and uncracked, its surface swept free of debris. This space had been maintained. No vermin, no signs of water damage, no clutter. Just a quiet emptiness that felt more deliberate than neglect ever could. The flashlight passed over the room and settled on something metallic. At the far end stood a large safe steel cabinet with reinforced doors, gleaming faintly where the flashlight struck its hinges. It looked too modern for the house, its design inconsistent with anything else she had seen. No dust clung to its edges. No rust marred its corners. The digits on the combination lock were sharp and clear. Someone had tended to it recently, perhaps even after Henry's death. The thought sent a chill through her. Who else knew about this place? She approached cautiously, her flashlight illuminating a small cluster of symbols scratched into the metal beside the lock. At first they seemed random, but as she wiped away a thin layer of grime, the numbers became unmistakable. A date, etched with the carelessness of someone who trusted no one but themselves to interpret the meaning. She repeated the numbers quietly, her fingers trembling without her permission. She felt ridiculous for hoping the combination might work, but she also felt compelled to try. The first turn of the dial clicked satisfyingly into place, then the next. By the time she completed the third sequence, she felt her breath lodged in her throat. With the final turn, the hinge released with a firm metallic snap, and the door opened a few inches, as though welcoming her into yet another layer of the secret. Inside, rows of shelves held small velvet pouches, wooden boxes, and glass jars, so numerous she could barely absorb the full scope of them at once. She reached for the nearest pouch with careful fingers, expecting to find something ordinary or disappointing, but when she opened it and angled her flashlight inside, the pouch shimmered with pale, uncut stones, diamonds unpolished and raw, catching the flashlight and fracturing it into small stars of reflected light. She stood frozen, unable to believe what she held. She reached for a second pouch, then a third, each revealing stones similar or more vibrant than the last. Rubies, emeralds, sapphires, all in natural form. Her first instinct was disbelief. Her second was fear. This was no ordinary inheritance. This was wealth stored in pure, unregistered form, wealth that could change a life instantly, for better or worse, depending on who held it. A soft envelope resting atop a small ledger caught her attention then. Her name was written across the front in her uncle's unmistakable handwriting. She swallowed hard and opened it. The letter was brief but heavy with meaning. Henry wrote of his work as a jeweler, of the underground dealings he had uncovered while supporting families who had been trapped in dangerous labor cycles. He explained that the stones were the honest portion of those exchanges, purchases made to free people who could not otherwise escape their circumstances. He wrote that he had hidden the stones to protect them from being misused, and that he had spent years deciding whom he could trust with them. She felt an ache in her chest as she read his final lines, where he wrote of watching her from a distance after her mother's death, admiring her resilience. He said he had seen in her a bravery and integrity the rest of the family lacked, and he hoped she would use what he left her to create something better for herself and others. The letter trembled in her hands when she finished. She lowered herself to the concrete floor, struggling to steady her thoughts. It felt as though the world had tilted slightly out of place. The echo of her breath filled the room. Above her head, countless stones glimmered silently, holding the weight of stories she would never fully know. The stories of the people her uncle had helped, the stories of danger, sacrifice, and redemption, all preserved in this hidden vault. For several minutes she sat in stillness, letting the shock and responsibility settle over her. She thought of Toby. She thought of the fragile peace she maintained in her daily life. She thought of the bills, the water shutoff, the looming rent, the constant sense of falling behind. And then she thought of the possibility that now stretched before her, delicate and uncertain, but undeniably real. This discovery could lift the anchor that had weighed her down for years, but more importantly, it could become something greater than she had ever envisioned. She stood with renewed resolve and inspected the rest of the vault with methodical patience. The ledger contained entries dating back decades, meticulously recorded by Henry's careful hand. Some stones had been labeled with the names of the families he had helped, others with places she had only read about in passing. These weren't trophies. They were remnants of people's survival. The weight of that responsibility pressed on her, but instead of fear, she felt a sense of clarity forming. By the time she left the vault, locking it carefully behind her, she had made a decision. She would not take everything. She would not grab the stones and disappear, no matter how tempting such an escape might be. She would begin cautiously, learn, seek professional discretion, understand the landscape she was stepping into, and then, with the wisdom of those steps, she would choose a path that honored what Henry had hoped for her. When she returned to the upstairs rooms, she noticed the house differently. The cracks in the paint looked less like neglect and more like age. The silence of the rooms felt less hollow, as though the house had invited her inside not out of necessity, but out of trust. She moved room to room with a new awareness, studying old family photographs she had overlooked, inspecting dusty furniture with a reverence she hadn't felt before. The place had been a mystery hours earlier. Now it felt like a threshold. When she stepped outside onto the porch, the Louisiana light filtered through the trees, casting a soft shimmer across the water. She paused at the edge of the wooden bridge, looking back at the house that had just changed the course of her life. The stillness around her was no longer eerie. It was peaceful, a calm unlike anything she had felt in a long time. As she began the journey back to Florida, she felt something shift within her. Not certainty. She was far from having answers, but purpose. The house was no longer a burden or a joke hurled by distant relatives. It was an opportunity waiting to be shaped. And though she didn't yet know how she would move forward, she sensed that every step from here on would matter. That sense stayed with her throughout the long drive, guiding her thoughts, pushing her toward possibilities she had never dared consider. She didn't yet know all the doors she would open, nor all the futures she would influence. But she felt, for the first time in a very long while, that she was standing on the brink of something extraordinary. The drive back to Louisiana a week later felt different from every trip she had taken before. This time, Catherine did not feel like a woman fumbling in the dark or stumbling through circumstances that dragged her along. She was returning with purpose, with a plan beginning to take shape in her mind, although she still could not see the full outline of it. She had spent the past several days moving through work shifts with a quiet intensity, thinking through every detail of what she would do next. At night, while Toby slept peacefully beside his lamp shaped like a rocket ship, she stayed awake in the glow of her laptop screen, researching gemologists, discrete buyers, legal implications, and charitable structures. She read late into the night until her eyes blurred, seeking a path that honored what she had found without falling into the dangers Henry had warned against in his letter. Each morning she woke exhausted, but with a deeper sense of direction. The house stayed in her thoughts constantly, as though the memory of the wooden bridge and the dim hallway leading to the vault had attached itself to her, even from miles away. She remembered the feeling of the cool concrete under her hands, the rows of stones glimmering faintly under her flashlight, the revelation wrapped in Henry's letter. She remembered her own stillness as she tried to absorb everything she had discovered. And though she still worried about making mistakes or being drawn into something she did not fully understand, she felt strangely steady whenever she thought of the house. It was as if the place had anchored itself within her, offering a kind of silent support. When she arrived once more at the property, she parked at the foot of the wooden bridge and stepped out of the car slowly, holding her breath without realizing it. The air felt different now, welcoming rather than wary. The house stood in its quiet dignity, untouched since she had left it, but somehow less lonely. She made her way across the bridge, listening to the soft groan of the boards beneath her feet. The still water reflected the sky and the trees around it, making it feel almost like walking through two parallel worlds, one above and one below. Inside, she set her bags down and took a slow breath. The house was no longer unfamiliar. She knew its shadows, its creaks, its waiting silences. She made her way directly to the kitchen, the flashlight already in her hand, though the room was still bright with morning. As she pried open the concealed door once more and descended into the basement, she felt a steady rhythm in her chest, a recognition that she was taking the first real steps toward a life she had never dared imagine for herself. She opened the vault door again, the smooth satisfaction of the lock releasing familiar now. She took out only a few stones, handling each with the same care she might give to something fragile and irreplaceable. These were not items to her. They were symbols of lives, histories, and opportunities. She placed them into a small cloth pouch, then carefully shut everything else away. She locked the vault once more, pressing her palm briefly to the cool metal surface, feeling an odd connection to the man who had left all this in her hands. The next several weeks moved in a blur, though every moment felt deliberate. She met discreetly with a gemologist 2 states over, a man whose quiet office and gentle manner reassured her immediately. He examined the stones under a jeweler's lamp, then looked at her over the rim of his glasses with a knowing expression she could not quite read. He did not ask how she acquired them. Instead, he explained their worth, their classifications, and the safest way to introduce them into legitimate markets without raising suspicion or attracting the wrong kind of attention. When he offered to act as an intermediary for the sale, she accepted, grateful for someone who seemed more interested in helping her navigate the complexities than in exploiting her ignorance. She sold only enough to secure her immediate needs, enough to clear her debts, create a modest savings, and gather funds for the renovation she had begun to imagine. Each sale felt momentous, not because of the money itself, but because it allowed her to move closer to the vision forming inside her. She did not know the full shape of it yet, but she knew it involved the house, the land, and a purpose far larger than her own comfort. The first time she arrived at a hardware store with the means to purchase supplies, without worrying about overdrafts or declined cards, she nearly cried in the aisle. She hired contractors from towns far enough away that gossip would not reach the ears of anyone who knew the Lowry family. She insisted on background checks and confidentiality, not out of arrogance but out of genuine fear for the safety of the house and what it contained. The workers arrived in unmarked trucks and began stabilizing the porch, restoring the roof, replacing old wiring, and clearing out mold that had crept into the corners of the upper rooms. As the house began to transform around her, Catherine found a strange sense of renewal awakening within her as well. At first, she intended merely to restore the house, maybe turn it into a rental property or sell it. But the more time she spent walking its halls, the more the idea grew that this space could become something profoundly meaningful. It had survived years of abandonment, held its secrets faithfully, and waited for someone willing to honor its history. She could not imagine turning it into a passive investment. She wanted it to breathe again, to be filled with voices and laughter and life. Her idea came together one quiet evening as she sat on the porch with the soft hum of insects surrounding her. She thought about the women she met at work, tired, worn down, juggling jobs and childcare, and the heavy weight of silent struggles. She thought about the shelters she had once sought in the hardest years of her life, the overworked staff, the crowded dormitories, the lack of resources. She thought about her own mother, who had spent years trying to escape circumstances that seemed determined to swallow her whole. What if this house could be a haven for women like them? A place where they could rest, recover, and rebuild? A retreat offering safety instead of judgment, dignity instead of pity, a fresh start instead of another dead end? The vision took hold of her so firmly that she could hardly sleep that night. By morning, it was no longer an idea but a calling. She started researching state requirements, nonprofit structures, liability laws, and therapy programs. She reached out to a social worker she had once met during a difficult period in her life, a woman named Elena who had once shown her an unexpected kindness without asking for anything in return. Elena listened with growing excitement as Catherine explained what she wanted: to build something more than a shelter, something restorative, empowering, transformative. Elena agreed to help immediately, promising to assist with program development and licensing. The renovations took months, and during that time, Catherine moved through life with a sense of quiet purpose. Toby visited the property often, helping pull weeds or paint railings, treating the place as though it had always been part of their lives. Contractors came and went, volunteers appeared through Elena's connections, and gradually the house began to take on a new identity. Fresh paint brightened the once dark exterior. New windows let in sunlight that had been shut out for decades. Comfortable furniture replaced the dusty relics of the past. The land around the house was cleared just enough to create a garden and play area, while still preserving the natural serenity that had drawn her to the place in the first place. It was only when word began to quietly spread through distant relatives that Catherine was renovating the swamp house that the trouble began. At first, there were calls, voicemails dripping with false concern, messages pretending to check on her well-being. Then when she didn't respond, the tone shifted. Accusations of entitlement, demands for explanations, questions about family property rights. She ignored them all, focusing on the work in front of her. Unfortunately, ignoring her relatives did not stop them. One Saturday morning, while she was reviewing blueprints with a contractor, she heard the crunch of tires on the gravel road outside. She stepped onto the porch and saw a line of sleek cars approaching, looking as out of place in the forest as a row of polished shoes in a muddy field. Her stomach tightened. She had hoped to avoid this confrontation, but she had known it would come eventually. Melissa emerged first, dressed in designer clothes that struck Catherine as theatrical against the backdrop of old trees and simple wooden planks. Behind her came Uncle Ray, Aunt Linda, and two cousins who looked around with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. They wasted no time. They demanded to know what she thought she was doing, what she had found, what she was hiding. They insisted the house was family property, that the will must have been altered, that Uncle Henry would never leave something so valuable to someone so irresponsible. Catherine listened with an expression that surprised even herself, calm, resolute, almost detached. She had expected to crumble under their scrutiny, but instead she felt a quiet strength rising from the roots of everything she had learned and survived. She explained that the will was legal and binding, that the house belonged to her, and that she intended to use it for a charitable purpose. When they pushed harder, demanding financial records or access to the property, she told them firmly that they had no such rights. The confrontation escalated until even the workers paused their tasks to watch. Melissa accused her of manipulating a senile old man. Uncle Ray threatened legal action. Someone suggested she had no idea how to manage money. Through it all, Catherine remained unmoved. Finally, she told them that if they wished to help the project, they were welcome to apply as volunteers like anyone else. But if they wished only to take, they had come to the wrong place. The stunned silence that followed felt like a wall falling between her and the family she had never really belonged to. One by one they left, engines growling, dust rising behind their tires. She watched them disappear down the road, feeling a mixture of relief and closure. The house grew into its new purpose over the next year. Programs were implemented, bedrooms prepared, communal spaces organized. The first families arrived quietly, carrying with them the remnants of lives marked by hardship. Some stayed for weeks, others for months. The house held their stories gently, offering them a place to rebuild. Laughter began to echo through its hallways. Children played near the garden, and women gathered in the evenings to talk, share, or simply breathe. Word spread slowly, attracting supporters and donors who believed in the work being done. With each passing month, the house's identity as Harbor House solidified. Through it all, Catherine continued to manage the vault carefully. She sold stones sparingly, using their value not for personal comfort, but to expand the programs, pay staff, assist families, and create long-term foundations that would outlast the finite treasure. She tracked every stone in a ledger of her own, honoring the one Henry had kept, ensuring transparency and intention with every decision. She knew the vault would eventually empty, but she also knew the new life she had built would not depend on it forever. 5 years after she first crossed the wooden bridge, Catherine stood once again on the porch, watching a group of children chasing each other across the lawn. Toby, now older and taller, tended to the vegetable beds alongside 2 other boys. Inside, Elena led a workshop for new mothers. The house no longer felt like a relic from a forgotten past. It felt alive, breathing, fulfilling a purpose far more profound than anything Catherine had imagined when she first found the hidden door. She descended the basement steps one evening, looking at the few remaining stones in the vault. They glimmered softly, their light steady and sure, but she no longer felt the weight of temptation or fear. Instead, she felt gratitude for Henry's strange and quiet faith in her, for the chance to become someone she had once believed she could never be, for the community that had grown from one man's hidden legacy. When the last stone was finally sold, she closed the vault door not with sadness, but with a calm acceptance. The treasure had served its purpose. The house would continue without it, held up now not by diamonds but by people, by hope, by the kind of resilience she had cultivated in herself and then shared with others. As she locked the vault, she felt a freedom she had never expected, a freedom born not from wealth, but from having used that wealth to build something that mattered. That night, as she tucked Toby into bed in their room overlooking the water, he asked her if she ever wished things had been different. She thought for a moment, then shook her head. Everything that had once felt like burden or mockery had become the foundation of something far greater. She kissed his forehead, turned off the lamp, and stepped quietly into the hallway, listening to the soothing silence of the house around her. The moonlight spilled across the floorboards, shining softly like the last glimmers of the vault's treasures. She paused at the window, looking toward the water, where the reflection of the house shimmered on the surface. It was no longer a place of secrets. It had become a sanctuary, a testament to the idea that the greatest value lies not in what we keep hidden, but in what we bring into the light. She whispered a thank you to the man who had believed in her when no one else had, then turned away ready for another day of work, another day of purpose, another step forward in a life she had built from what others once dismissed as worthless. The house stood quietly behind her, sturdy and serene, its legacy no longer buried but thriving, one changed life at a time. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss the next chapter. Make sure to check out the next video and explore more incredible stories waiting for you on the channel. And if this one touched you, inspired you, or surprised you, share it with someone who'd love it too. Subscribe, watch more, and keep the journey going.